Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me at Ridefly Fitness, the page dedicated to the pursuit of fitness in all its forms. Today's video is going to be an offshoot of last week's video, which was basically an introduction to public speaking and how you can go about improving your skill with that, particularly in terms of overcoming some of your irrational fears, as well as basically looking at the other side of the coin, the motivations and some of the positive benefits from choosing to improve your ability in public speaking. If that sounds good to you, or if you're new to the page, please consider subscribing below. Change your bell notifications to on. That way, you'll stay abreast of all new material put on this page. That being said, let's get into the content. Today, I want to talk about how I go about building a presentation from scratch. Basically, whatever I have to do, I go through 6 steps that allow me to go from basically getting over my writer's block to getting to the point where I'm ready to give the presentation. The first thing I like to do, basically step 1, if I have writer's block, which is almost always, I do something called TAP. Sounds kind of corny, but it helps. TAP stands for basically topic, audience, and your purpose. All 3 of which are usually pretty easy to define and can get you that kick and that motivation going in the right direction. So for instance, topic. Usually given to you by a teacher, maybe your boss, or maybe you get to pick the topic. Even better, you pick something you like to talk about, it's fun, it's easy, and your delivery is awesome, right? The second one is audience. Audience, again, you usually don't get a pick in most cases, but it's really, really important in determining how and what your content is. For example, let's say you had to do a presentation to a CEO and CFO of an organization. Obviously, the way you talk, the pace of talking, your vocabulary would all be very related to the people, your audience, right? Conversely, let's say you had to give a presentation to a bunch of international students who just came to the country and they're freshmen at the local high school. Obviously, you probably wouldn't talk as fast and you wouldn't use the same words or even the same examples. You would totally change the way that you addressed your audience to make it a more effective presentation, right? Something to keep in mind when we go about through these steps, building the actual presentation. And finally, probably the most important one, is thinking about your purpose, right? Many times for me, my purpose was just not to die. The bad part about that is the audience can sense that. They know how uncomfortable you are, and while they don't think bad thoughts usually, well, they don't want to watch because it's uncomfortable, right? The presenter does not want to make his audience not want to watch him. That's a failing grade, right? The way you counter that is basically think about what the audience would want, which is they probably want to be entertained, they probably want to learn something, they want to be informed or persuaded. Somehow just engage with them, make it value added to them, right? So I find when I approach my purpose this way, it kind of allows me to make a more effective speech and stay motivated throughout the creative process. So for this speech, for instance, my topic is pretty straightforward, right? Public speaking and how to improve it. My audience is, again, pretty obvious. Ideally, English speakers on YouTube who are looking for tutorials on getting better at public speaking or creating a presentation. And finally, my purpose is basically just being able to communicate and share the amazing experience I had developing my skills in public speaking and sharing some of the shortcuts and pro tips, if you will, that I came across during my development and during my path. So at the end of creating this TAP, right, this topic, audience, and purpose assessment, you're naturally segueing right into the very important step of brainstorming. Brainstorming to me used to be terrifying. It was really synonymous with me thinking I had to have great ideas within a minute, and if I didn't, becoming very discouraged, and then not wanting to do it because I thought I was stupid and couldn't do it. And over time I learned to get over myself, and a good saying I learned was just basically let it go so you can let ideas flow. Right? So there's no right or wrong answer when pre-writing. You're just writing out every possible idea that you think might be related or you might want to include in the presentation. A lot of people do it, all different ways. Some people like to do webs or clusters. Your first grade teacher probably taught you all kinds of ways. For me, however, I only found one way works, and that's to completely get away from writing it in any way, and instead use a cell phone use your computer, or in another way, just allow your voice to be recorded. I find that allows me just to be much less critical of myself and allow me to get more high quality ideas down in a quicker way. After I do that, what I like to do is basically slowly listen to everything I recorded and write them down in as coherent sentences and ideas as I can. Sometimes that takes 2 times to listen through because you talk too fast. That's okay. Just make sure you get them all down. At that point, you'll find that they naturally float into different areas and that you can group the ideas into major ideas, themes, or maybe even topics for your presentation. What's cool about that is you basically written half of your presentation already. It leads us into step 3, which is basically taking your ideas and creating a draft, right? A draft is basically just content mixed with a structure. Right now we have the content. What we need is the structure. Structure is pretty straightforward, just the organization of how you want to give the information. This is usually determined by questions you could ask yourself. For instance, do I know the form of my speech or presentation? Is it a story? Is it naturally segregated into a beginning, a middle, and an end? Is it training or education? Does it have a natural progression of steps? Or is it argumentative or persuasive? Do I create an argument, then talk about the counterpoint, then the argument, then the counterpoint? Basically, there's no right answer to this, and it should be determined according to your needs and your purpose, right? Another easy way, if you're really not sure how to proceed, is to go back to the way you were taught to write essays in the 5-paragraph form. First paragraph is going to be your introduction, topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, followed by a conclusion. Just your basic 5-paragraph essay. And that's exactly what I did when I was creating this presentation. I recorded all my thoughts for 10 minutes on a recorder. I transcribed them into groups, or rather into ideas, then I put them in the groups. From that point, I kind of had my main idea, and I found that after reviewing them, there were actually 3 main ideas within that one idea of public speaking. And the first one became my first video, which is kind of like motivations and fears, the emotional aspect of it. Video 2, which is this one, is basically making and creating a presentation. The main idea 3 was basically polishing and creating an amazing presentation from the work you did in the previous 2 steps. In addition to those main components of a structure, it's important to say something about mandatory aspects of any presentation, which is an opening or an introduction and a closing or a conclusion, right? I hesitate to give too much feedback on that because it's really subjective. All I know is for an introduction, you definitely want to pull people in. You want to get their attention. You want to tell them why it matters and what you're going to be talking about, and basically give them an outline. And you should personally, I feel, play with this. Take different ideas in and see what sounds most right and most like you. And the same thing for the conclusion. The conclusion should have some basic things like restate the main topic for an audience, suggest next steps, maybe call to an action, or leave them with some big zinger that captures their attention. And again, with that, I think you should play with it and try different ideas that make you feel comfortable and make it sound like it's really you. So at this point, honestly, you're in great shape. You should have your content locked as well as your structure locked. So basically, you have a script. You have everything you think you want to say. Now comes the interesting part, is that when you actually start to practice it, you'll realize what you actually want to say will not come out nearly as good as you thought it would, at least on the first, second, or third tries. That leads me to the 4th point, which is basically refinement or practice of your speech. What I like to do with this part is read it out loud. Read my script aloud in a natural a way as possible with your voice and to time it. And I do this at least 3 times. Trust me on this. You'll probably actually want to do it more. The reason is amazing changes happen during this period. After you've done all your writing, you'll be very familiar with your script, and as you start to say it, you'll realize you start to say it in new ways each time, or with better transitions, or with better examples, or with better tone or presentation or anything. Basically, each time you'll do it, you'll notice it gets smooth and just awesome. It magically sounds better just due to the byproduct of your brain's ability with language. And a key for me is basically as I'm going through and saying it, often you have to stop and edit your speech actually in the moment. Add the thing that sounds like it needed to be added, change the transition, make it more natural. Feel free to chop up your script as you're doing this, because you're literally improving it and still creating it as you go. So give yourself that flexibility that you're just working out the clunkiness, and the idea is to make it as smooth as possible. And this is the best way to do it, at least that I've found. When you feel that you've done it maybe 3 to 4 times, I like to give myself a little status check. And by that, I'd ask myself a few questions like, are you beginning to speak more freely about the topic versus just reading something verbatim that you memorized, right? Or are you more comfortable ad-libbing? Maybe you forget an actual point, but you can talk around the point. Or maybe you forgot the last point, but you can transition into the next major point fairly easily. Right, this is just due to familiarization and should be natural increases as you do it more and more. And finally, I like to note whether or not my timing is actually consistent. A lot of times you have a set amount of time that you can present, or you're trying to go, for a certain amount. This is a good time to assess whether or not you're rambling on too much, or whether you might need to put more filler in to meet the criteria. And almost always, we tend to forget that the point of the speech is to talk about something as an expert, looking at everyone and engaging with everyone. It is absolutely not reading a PowerPoint, not reading something on your sheet in front of you, and it is absolutely not memorizing something and saying it. The reason is because people like to interact with genuine, authentic people. And when you're just reciting something, it's really easy to be checked out and not even pay attention and not be engaged with your audience, and your audience absolutely will pick that up. So the goal is just to be real, or off the cuff rather, and just come off as genuine master of something, communicating like you would to a good friend. This leads me into the 5th step, which is literally practicing the presentation. I like to do it 3 times. And the end goal is basically to take my script and each time to make it shorter. Instead of 3 sentences, I want to make it 1 sentence. And then the next time, half the sentence, right? Then the next time, maybe 3 words. So the idea is that the more familiar you are with your speech, the less you'll need to read it, the more quickly you can say it, and the less you'll need to actually refer back to your notes to be easily able to transfer back to your own memory and just talk freely about it, right? So after about 3 times, I would say you should start to feel that your notes are very minimized. You don't need much. Your throat should be tired from reciting it that many times. And your transition should be really smooth and really polished. And you should note an increased comfort in going through the material, right? If you're not, just keep going. 3 times may not be enough. Sometimes it takes 5 or 10 times. But the point is, it will keep going up, and it will find a part where it kind of levels off and you feel like, okay, I think I feel pretty good right now. Unfortunately, that's a huge temptation, because so many times at this point I'm like, all right, I'm done. I feel good. I can do this. But actually, there's a certain level of angst and anxiety that really can't be appreciated until you're in the moment presenting. And that brings us to step 6, which is just giving your presentation. By that, I mean do it as serious as you possibly can. Wear whatever you're going to wear. Do not allow yourself to screw up. If you screw up, you keep going. It doesn't matter how you feel. You just do it. You simulate the battle conditions so that you have the right mindset when you actually need to do it. This can be accomplished a lot of different ways. Recording yourself with your own cell phone, asking your friend or your mom to record you, or just having someone sit down and allowing you to look at them while you're doing it. Last case, if you have no equipment, look in the mirror. Just look at yourself and do it. You'd be amazed at the levels of comfort that you smash through and increase the more you do this kind of practice. And basically, when you're going to be studying your film, which is ideally what you want to do, record yourself if possible, is to look at eliminating some of the weird sounds we make. We all do it. It's totally normal. It's just a byproduct of our evolution where we get anxious. We create filler words, and it's really expected, and we don't judge people when we see it, but it really raises it to the next level when someone's able to stop quietly and pause for impact without relying on nervous tics. And similar to that would be mannerisms like bobbing your head or just twitches or always doing the same thing. A lot of times we have physical nervous twitches that we have to work through and notice. And okay, you're not going to get better and fix all these through a few reviews of your videos, but just being aware of it and being cognizant of it will allow you to correct them when you're actually shooting videos going forward. So I assure you it's not a useless exercise. So again, one more status check I like to do after I presented it 3 times on film is basically, you know, how do I feel? You should feel fantastic. You should feel really comfortable at this point in time. It should feel good. You should be super familiar with your information to a T. Maybe not even really need to look at the notes more than 1 second just to force yourself to move on to the next point. And overall, how do you look? Are you happy with how you sounded, how you presented? And if not, practice more. You're totally able to do that. Not a problem. Just like with all things, the more effort and I guess attempts you put into it, the greater rewards you're going to see. So, you know, look at how far you've come already. Likely you felt really terrified and had no idea where to start, and here you are making an A to Z presentation, having practiced it and ready to pitch it. So at this point, I hate to raise the bar even more, but at this point in your public speaking level, you realize communication is not really just the content, which is what we developed today. It's not what you say, but it's also how you say it and how your audience receives this message, right? That's not all their fault. A lot of that can be impacted by you too. And this is the topic of the final and third video in the series, which is kind of putting it all together, how to polish your video. In particular, how, as much as you can you actually develop charisma by being aware of how it affects people? How to develop your confidence in projection of your energy. Or talking about the Greeks. They studied it for a long time. Logos, ethos, pathos. Ways that we subconsciously receive and align ourselves with the message and presenter himself. So in closing, guys, thank you so much again for your time. I hope you found this video useful, somewhat entertaining, and hopefully provided you with a number of tangible skills that you can put into practice. If you lasted this long and enjoyed and found the video useful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, share it on Facebook. Additionally, you can follow me on Ryfly Fitness on my Instagram account as well. Thank you guys so much. In the comments, please feel free to let me know what you thought.